The champagne hit her head before anyone could scream. Cold liquid splashed across white hair, soaking through thin gray fabric, dripping down weathered cheeks like artificial tears. The crystal flute caught chandelier light as it tilted, and for one frozen second, every person in that marble lobby held their breath. Then the gasps came. A woman in a pale blue gown stood with her arms still extended, blonde hair perfectly styled, diamond earrings swinging from the force of her throw. Her mouth twisted into something between satisfaction and disgust. "That's what happens," she announced to the watching crowd, "when trash doesn't know its place." The elderly woman didn't flinch. She sat on the lobby bench with her hands folded neatly in her lap, champagne streaming down her face, her eyes closed as if in prayer. Not a single muscle moved. Not a sound escaped her lips. 43 people witnessed this moment. 17 recorded it on their phones. Not one stepped forward. The blonde woman laughed, a sharp brittle sound that bounced off marble walls. "Nothing to say? Maybe now you'll learn to stay away from places you don't belong." But here's what nobody in that crowd understood. Here's what Maribel Ashford couldn't possibly have known as she smoothed her designer gown and turned back toward the ballroom doors. The woman she had just publicly humiliated was not some random homeless stranger. She was Etta Mae Calderon. And 40 years ago, her husband had helped build the very systems that kept Washington running. The quiet systems. The ones without names. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 10,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Now, let's get back to the story. The Jefferson Plaza Hotel sparkled that November evening like a temple to American wealth. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings 3 stories high. Marble floors reflected the glow of 1,000 electric candles. Outside, a line of black sedans stretched around the corner, each one carrying donors worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Inside the grand ballroom, Senator Clayton Ashford worked the room with practiced ease. Tall, silver-haired, with a jaw that photographers loved, he shook hands and made promises he never intended to keep. His re-election campaign needed $12 million. Tonight's fundraiser would bring in 3. His wife Maribel had arrived separately, fashionably late, already 2 glasses of champagne past pleasant. She wore custom Valentino, pale blue silk that cost more than a year's rent in most American cities. Her jewelry alone could feed a family for a decade. Maribel Ashford had been born wealthy and married wealthier. She'd never pumped her own gas, never waited in line at a grocery store, never spoken to a service worker without complaint. In her world, poor people existed only as inconveniences to be managed or removed. So when she spotted Etta Mae Calderon sitting on the lobby bench, she saw only one thing: a problem. "Excuse me." Maribel's heels clicked against marble as she approached, her voice already raised. "What exactly do you think you're doing here?" Etta looked up slowly. Her eyes were the color of morning fog, pale and patient. "Just resting, ma'am. I'll move along shortly." "Shortly isn't acceptable." Maribel snapped her fingers at a passing hotel employee. "Why is this person allowed inside? This is a private event." The employee, a young man with nervous hands, stammered. "Ma'am, the lobby is technically public space until—" "I don't care about technically." Maribel stepped closer to Etta, close enough that her perfume overwhelmed the air. "Do you have any idea who my husband is? Do you understand what kind of people are here tonight?" Etta's hands remained folded. "I understand perfectly, ma'am." "Then you understand that your presence is offensive." Maribel gestured broadly, champagne sloshing in her glass. "These people donate to real causes. Important causes. And they shouldn't have to look at this." The crowd had begun to gather now. Men in tuxedos. Women in evening gowns. They formed a loose circle, watching the confrontation with the same detached interest they might give a car accident. Nobody intervened. A woman in red whispered to her companion, "Should someone call security?" Her companion shrugged. "It's Maribel Ashford. You don't interfere with Maribel Ashford." Etta absorbed all of it. The stares. The whispers. The moral cowardice of wealthy people who would rather watch an elderly woman be humiliated than risk social discomfort. She had seen this before. In different rooms, with different faces, but always the same ugly truth. Power protects itself. "Ma'am," Etta said quietly, "I lost my husband 6 years ago. I lost my home shortly after. I come here sometimes because the warmth reminds me of better days. I don't bother anyone. I don't ask for anything. I just sit." For a moment, something flickered across Maribel's face. It might have been human recognition. It might have been shame. Then it vanished. "Your sad story doesn't give you the right to contaminate a political fundraiser." Maribel raised her champagne glass like a weapon. "People like you are the reason this country has problems. Too lazy to work. Too proud to disappear. Well, let me help you understand where you stand." The champagne poured down. Etta closed her eyes. Cold liquid soaked through her gray coat, that faithful coat she'd worn for 3 winters now. It ran through her silver hair, pooled in the wrinkles of her neck, dripped onto hands still folded with dignity. She did not cry. She did not scream. She whispered something so soft that only Maribel could hear it. "Raphael always said this day would come." Maribel frowned. "What?" Etta opened her eyes. They had changed. Something ancient moved behind them now, something that made Maribel take an involuntary step backward. "Nothing that concerns you, ma'am." "Not yet." Security arrived then. 2 large men in dark suits who looked at the champagne-soaked elderly woman and the powerful senator's wife and made their calculation instantly. "Ma'am," one said to Etta, "we need you to come with us." Not Maribel. Not the woman who had committed assault in front of 40 witnesses. Etta. She rose slowly, champagne still dripping, dignity somehow intact. As the guards escorted her toward the side exit, she passed within inches of Maribel Ashford. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Because in that moment, walking through those marble halls with her head held high and her hands still folded, Etta May Calderon had already made her decision. What that decision meant, Maribel wouldn't understand until morning. But by then it would be far too late. Maribel Ashford returned to the ballroom like a conquering general. Her champagne glass had been refilled. Her hair remained perfect. The incident outside existed now only as a story she would tell at brunch tomorrow, embellished for maximum entertainment. You should have seen her face. Maribel laughed to her circle of admirers, women with similar jewelry and identical moral bankruptcy. Just sat there dripping like a wet dog. These people have no shame. Senator Clayton Ashford worked the opposite side of the room, unaware of his wife's adventure. He posed for photographs with donors, promised committee seats to lobbyists, accepted checks folded discreetly into handshakes. Politics had been good to Clayton. 22 years in the Senate. Chairman of 3 powerful committees. A cabinet position whispered about in serious rooms. His secrets were buried deep. Or so he believed. Maribel handled that beautifully, one woman said, adjusting her diamond necklace. Someone had to do something. The hotel should be ashamed. Clayton's lucky to have her, another agreed. She protects the brand. Maribel soaked in the praise like sunlight. In her world, cruelty to the powerless wasn't shameful. It was expected. The poor existed to remind the wealthy of their success. Humiliating them was practically charity. You know what the problem is? Maribel leaned in conspiratorially. People feel sorry for them. That's why they multiply. If we stopped enabling helplessness, they'd figure it out. The women nodded. This was the philosophy of their class, dressed in silk and justified by tax brackets. Across the ballroom, Senator Ashford caught his wife's eye and raised his glass in silent toast. 24 years of marriage had taught him that Maribel's moods meant nothing good. But tonight he felt invincible. The donors were generous. The polls were favorable. His opposition had crumbled. "Nothing can touch us now," he told a campaign advisor, clapping the younger man on the shoulder. "We've built something untouchable." Those words would haunt him before sunrise. The party continued past midnight. Champagne flowed. Promises were made. Money changed hands in ways that would never appear on any public record. When the last donor finally departed, Maribel and Clayton rode home in the back of their town car, satisfied and slightly drunk. "Good night?" Clayton asked, scrolling through his phone. "Perfect night." Maribel examined her reflection in a compact mirror. "I handled a small situation in the lobby. Homeless woman. Can you believe they let her inside? You didn't cause a scene? I solved a problem." Maribel snapped the compact shut. "Someone had to. That's what we do, Clayton. We solve problems other people are too weak to address." Clayton nodded absently, his attention on an email from his chief of staff. Everything looked normal. Everything felt secure. Their Georgetown townhouse glowed warm when they arrived. 4 stories of historical architecture, renovated with government contracts and lobbyist generosity. Maribel went straight to her bathroom suite. Clayton poured himself a nightcap in the study. Neither noticed the unmarked sedan parked across the street. Neither saw the figure inside, watching their windows go dark one by one. In her marble bathroom, Maribel removed the diamonds from her ears and smiled at her reflection. The night had been perfect. The homeless woman had been dealt with. Order had been restored. She climbed into Egyptian cotton sheets beside her husband and fell asleep within minutes, dreaming of the next fundraiser, the next opportunity to perform her role as Washington royalty. She didn't dream of Etta Mae Calderon. She didn't dream of wet gray coats or patient fog-colored eyes. She didn't dream at all after 3 in the morning. Because at 3 in the morning, her husband's personal phone began buzzing with messages he wouldn't read until dawn. And by dawn, the world would look very different. Somewhere across the city, in a 24-hour diner with fluorescent lights, Etta Mae Calderon sat alone in a corner booth. Her coat had dried. Her hair had been smoothed back. In front of her sat a cup of black coffee she hadn't touched. The waitress, a heavy woman named Doreen with kind eyes and tired feet, had offered her pie twice. "It's on me, sweetheart. You look like you've had a rough night." Etta had declined politely. She wasn't hungry. She was thinking. 40 years ago, her husband Raphael had made her memorize a phone number. "Only for emergencies," he'd said. "Only if everything else has failed. Only if you have no other choice." She had never used it. Not when Raphael died. Not when the pension vanished. Not when the house was taken or the family disappeared. Not during 3 winters of sleeping in shelters and church basements and when nothing else was available under bridges. Pride, she supposed. Or maybe faith that things would improve. But tonight, something had broken inside her. Not her dignity. That remained intact. Something else. The belief that quiet endurance was enough. The hope that cruelty would eventually exhaust itself. Maribel Ashford had poured champagne on her head in front of 40 wealthy witnesses, and not a single person had objected. That changed things. Etta reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a worn piece of paper. The number was still there, written in Raphael's careful handwriting, faded but legible. She looked at it for a long time. Then she stood, left $2 on the table for the coffee she hadn't drunk, and walked out into the cold November night. There was a payphone 6 blocks away. Etta knew because she had passed it every day for 2 years, wondering if today would be the day. Tonight was the day. The streets felt different after midnight. Etta walked slowly, not from weakness but from consideration. Each step carried the weight of 4 decades, memories rising like ghosts from concrete and shadow. This neighborhood had changed since Raphael's time. The buildings were taller now. The lights were brighter. But underneath all that progress, the same bones remained. Her wet coat had stiffened in the cold air. The champagne smell clung to her collar, sweet and mocking. She had been humiliated in worse ways before. She had survived worse nights than this. But survival wasn't the same as acceptance. Etta stopped at a crosswalk and waited for the light, even though no cars were coming. Manners. Raphael had loved that about her. You could be the last person on earth, he used to say, and you'd still wait for the signal. Raphael Calderon. The name still made her chest tight after 6 years. He had been a quiet man with a loud impact. 3 decades in federal service, most of it classified. He never talked about his work, not in specifics. But sometimes, late at night after a glass of wine, he would hint at things. I've helped build mechanisms, he once told her. Not buildings. Not programs. Mechanisms. Systems that work whether anyone knows about them or not. She hadn't understood then. She understood better now. The light changed. Etta crossed. Her mind drifted back to the evening they first met. A library in Alexandria, 1981. She'd been a graduate student in social work. He'd been something he never fully explained. What she remembered most was how he looked at her. Not through her. Not past her. At her. You have honest eyes, he'd said. That's rare in this city. They were married within a year. 43 years together. No children, by choice. They had each other, and that had been enough. When Raphael died, everything unraveled. The pension paperwork disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. The house, which she thought was paid off, turned out to be leveraged against debts she never knew existed. His colleagues, those quiet men in quiet suits, stopped returning her calls. Within 18 months, Etta Mae Calderon went from comfortable widow to homeless. She learned things during those years on the street. She learned which shelters were safe and which ones weren't. She learned how to make eye contact that discouraged trouble without inviting conversation. She learned to fold her hands in her lap, always neatly, always calmly, as if good posture could protect her from the world's cruelty. It couldn't, but it helped her feel human. The payphone appeared ahead, a silver rectangle bolted to the wall outside a closed pharmacy. These machines were rare now, relics from another time. Etta had thought about calling the number many times over the past 2 years. She always found a reason not to. Not tonight. She approached the phone slowly, her breath visible in the cold air. The handset was scratched and smelled faintly of metal. She lifted it to her ear. Dial tone. Etta reached into her coat pocket and withdrew the worn paper. The numbers stared back at her, familiar as her own heartbeat. She began to dial. Each press of a button sent a small click through the line, mechanical and certain. When she finished, silence replaced the dial tone. Then a ring. Calderon. The voice on the other end was older than she remembered. Deeper. But the recognition in that single word was instant. "This is Etta," she said. "Raphael's wife." Silence. Then, "Ma'am, we thought you were dead." "I know. We looked for you. After Raphael passed, we tried to." "I know," she repeated gently. "I didn't want to be found. Not then." More silence. She could hear him breathing, processing, adjusting to a reality he hadn't expected. "Why now?" he finally asked. Etta looked up at the night sky, starless above city lights. "Someone hurt me tonight. In public. A powerful woman who thought I was nothing." "Are you injured?" "Not physically." Etta paused, choosing her words carefully. "I've endured many things these past years. Cold, hunger, invisibility. I've never asked for help. Not once." "I know, ma'am. That's why we couldn't find you. But tonight was different." Etta's voice hardened slightly, an edge appearing that hadn't been there before. "Tonight, a woman poured champagne on my head in front of witnesses because I looked homeless and she wanted entertainment. And not a single person stopped her." "Who?" "Her name is Maribel Ashford. Her husband is Senator Clayton Ashford." The man on the other end drew a sharp breath. "Senator Ashford." "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. It was respectful, almost formal. "Ma'am, do you remember what Raphael used to call the work he did? Mechanisms." "That's right. Mechanisms. Systems that work whether anyone knows about them or not." The man's voice dropped lower. "Senator Ashford has been on our radar for 17 years. Documented concerns. Financial irregularities. Foreign contacts that don't appear on any official record." Etta closed her eyes. Raphael always suspected. He did more than suspect. He built the file himself. Before he died, he made sure it was preserved, updated, protected. Why wasn't it ever used? Because we needed the right moment. The man paused. We needed someone with standing to make the request. Someone connected to Raphael. Someone the system would recognize. Etta opened her eyes. "You needed me. We needed you." We've always needed you. The question was whether you would call. Etta looked at the pharmacy window, dark and still. Her reflection stared back. An old woman in a worn coat, champagne stains visible on her collar, standing at a payphone in the middle of the night. But she didn't feel old anymore. She felt awake. What happens now? The man on the other end almost smiled. She could hear it in his voice. Now, ma'am, we do exactly what Raphael designed us to do. We correct the imbalance. Etta nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see her. One more thing, he added. The file on Senator Ashford. It's not small. Once we release it, there's no taking it back. Careers will end. Lives will change. Are you certain this is what you want? Etta thought about Maribel Ashford's diamond earrings catching the light. She thought about cold champagne soaking through her gray coat. She thought about 43 witnesses who watched and did nothing. I'm certain, she said. The line went quiet for a moment. Then the man spoke one final sentence, and everything changed. Ma'am, the name Calderon still carries weight in this city. By morning, Senator Ashford will understand exactly how much. The line disconnected with a soft click. Etta held the receiver for a moment longer, listening to the empty dial tone, feeling the weight of what she had just set in motion. Then she placed it back in its cradle and turned away from the payphone. The city looked the same. Street lights still flickered. Distant sirens still wailed. A taxi passed without slowing. Nothing had visibly changed. But everything had changed. Etta began walking, no destination in mind. Her feet knew these streets better than her conscious mind. 2 years of wandering had mapped every alley, every shelter, every warm corner where steam rose from underground grates. She thought about the man on the phone. Marcus Webb. She hadn't used his name during the call, but she remembered him. He'd been at Raphael's funeral, standing in the back row with 5 other men who never signed the guest book. They'd approached her afterward, offered condolences that felt like code, then disappeared. 6 months later, when her life began falling apart, she tried to contact them. The numbers didn't work. The addresses were empty. It was as if they'd never existed. Now she understood. They had been waiting, watching, protecting something Raphael had built, something that required her voice to activate. Mechanisms. She found herself at a small park, empty at this hour. A bench sat beneath a dying oak tree, its paint peeling, its wood warped from years of weather. Etta sat down and folded her hands in her lap. What had she done? The question echoed, but no guilt followed it. Guilt required wrongdoing, and Etta felt no wrong in what she'd set in motion. Maribel Ashford had poured champagne on an elderly woman's head for sport. Senator Ashford had built his career on lies and corruption that Raphael had documented with meticulous care. Justice wasn't revenge. It was correction. Etta looked up at the sky, searching for stars she knew she wouldn't find. City lights had stolen them long ago. Raphael used to take her stargazing when they were young. They'd drive out to the Virginia countryside, spread a blanket in an empty field, and watch the universe spin slowly overhead. Those were the only times he talked about his work without speaking in code. I protect balance, he told her once, his eyes on the Milky Way. That's all any of us do. We protect the balance between those who have power and those who don't. When the scales tip too far, we correct them. Sounds lonely, she'd said. It is. He'd squeezed her hand. But it matters. Now she was part of that balance. The last piece Raphael had left behind, activated by cruelty and champagne and the simple act of finally asking for help. The night grew colder. Etta pulled her coat tighter, feeling the stiffness where the champagne had dried. She should find shelter. A church basement would be warm. The women's shelter on K Street had space this time of year. But she didn't move. Instead, she waited. She didn't know what she was waiting for, exactly. Some sign that the mechanisms were working. Some confirmation that her call had mattered. Some proof that Raphael's legacy was still alive. An hour passed. Then 2. At 4 in the morning, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. Etta tensed but didn't run. Running at her age wasn't practical, and besides, if they wanted to harm her, they could have done it quietly. Black sedans in the middle of the night didn't advertise themselves when violence was the goal. A man stepped out. Middle-aged, black, wearing a wool coat and an expression that contained too many emotions to name. He approached the bench slowly, hands visible at his sides. "Mrs. Calderon?" Etta nodded. "I'm Marcus Webb. We spoke earlier." He gestured to the sedan. "May I sit?" Etta shifted slightly, making room. Marcus settled beside her on the bench, close enough to speak quietly but far enough to respect her space. "It's already started," he said. "How?" "The documents went to 6 news organizations 40 minutes ago. Email servers that can't be traced, encryption that can't be broken. By 6 a.m., 3 of them will have verified enough to run initial coverage. By noon, the Senate Ethics Committee will announce an investigation." Etta absorbed this in silence. 17 years of corruption, Marcus continued. Lobbyist payments funneled through shell companies. Campaign finance violations. Foreign contacts that violate half a dozen federal statutes. And that's just what we can prove publicly. The classified material? He shook his head. That stays internal. But it's enough to end security clearances, committee seats, any future in government. "His wife," Etta said quietly. "Maribel." Marcus turned to look at her. "What about her?" "She's the one who poured the champagne." "I know. We have footage. 17 cell phone recordings from the lobby." Etta's eyebrows rose. "You have those?" "We have everything, Mrs. Calderon. We've been watching the senator for years. When you called tonight, you didn't activate something new. You completed something Raphael started decades ago." The weight of this settled over Etta like a blanket. All those years of loss, of poverty, of cold nights and cruel strangers, and all along, her husband's work had been waiting for her. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew I would need this someday." Marcus nodded slowly. "Raphael Calderon was the most careful man I ever met. He planned for everything, including the possibility that someone powerful would eventually harm the person he loved most." Etta's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She had forgotten how to cry years ago. "There's one more thing," Marcus said. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small envelope, cream-colored and unmarked. "Raphael left this for you. Instructions were to deliver it only if and when you made the call." Etta took the envelope with trembling fingers. Her name was written on the front in Raphael's handwriting, careful and precise. "I'll give you privacy," Marcus said, standing. "The car will wait as long as you need." He walked back to the sedan and climbed inside, leaving Etta alone with the last message from her husband. She held the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once, containing 2 sentences. The words blurred as she read them, then sharpened into perfect clarity. And for the first time in 6 years, Etta Mae Calderon smiled. Dawn crept over Washington like a slow confession. Pink light touched the Capitol dome first, then spread across government buildings and monuments, warming marble that held a century of secrets. Early joggers circled the mall. Coffee shops flickered to life. Newspapers landed on doorsteps with soft thuds. It looked like any other morning. It wasn't. At 5:47 a.m., the first email landed in the inbox of a political reporter at the Washington Post. She'd been awake for an hour already, chasing a rumor about cabinet appointments, when the encrypted message appeared with no sender address and a subject line that made her coffee go cold. Senator Clayton Ashford, complete documentation of federal crimes. She almost deleted it. These kinds of messages arrived daily, usually nonsense from conspiracy theorists or political opponents with grudges. But something made her click. The attachment was 342 pages. By 5:52 a.m., she had called her editor. By 6:15 a.m., a team of 4 reporters was verifying the first batch of bank records. By 6:30 a.m., similar packages had opened at CNN, The New York Times, CBS News, and 2 local Washington affiliates. Each contained the same documents, the same timeline, the same meticulous evidence of 17 years of corruption. And each contained 1 photograph. The photograph showed Maribel Ashford in her pale blue gown, arm extended, champagne frozen midair above an elderly woman's bowed head. The caption read, This is what prompted the release. You decide what it means. In Georgetown, Senator Clayton Ashford slept through his alarm. His phone had been buzzing since 4 a.m., messages stacking up from campaign managers, lawyers, fellow senators, and reporters he'd never heard of. He'd silenced it at midnight and forgotten to check the settings. Maribel slept beside him, her face peaceful beneath a silk eye mask, her conscience unburdened by memory or anticipation. Neither of them heard the morning news broadcast that mentioned their name for the first time at 6:45 a.m. Neither saw the footage that began circulating on social media, 17 different angles of champagne pouring over an old woman's head while wealthy donors watched and did nothing. Neither noticed the black sedan still parked across the street, its occupant watching their windows with patient attention. At 7:12 a.m., the Senate Ethics Committee chairman received a phone call from the Department of Justice. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. By 7:20 a.m., a formal investigation had been authorized. By 7:45 a.m., the first television crews arrived outside the Ashford townhouse. Maribel woke to the sound of shouting. She removed her eye mask and blinked against morning light, disoriented by the noise. Protesters? An accident? She reached for her phone and found 11 missed calls from unknown numbers. Before she could investigate, Clayton burst through the bedroom door. She had never seen him look like this. His face was gray, his hands shaking, his eyes wild with a terror that seemed to have aged him overnight. What is it? Maribel sat up, alarm replacing confusion. Clayton, what's wrong? He couldn't speak. He simply turned his phone toward her and let the screen tell its story. Breaking. Senator Ashford under federal investigation for corruption. The headline sat above a photograph that made Maribel's blood freeze. It was her. Last night. Champagne suspended in the air, her face twisted with entitled rage, the elderly woman sitting beneath her with hands folded and head bowed. No, Maribel whispered. Clayton's voice cracked. It's everywhere. Every channel. Every website. They have documents, Maribel. Bank records. Emails. Things that were supposed to be buried forever. That's not possible. It's happening. He grabbed her shoulders, desperation making him rough. What did you do last night? Who was that woman? Maribel shook her head. Nobody. She was nobody. Just some homeless person in the lobby. Nobody doesn't take down a senator overnight. Clayton released her, pacing the room like a trapped animal. Nobody doesn't have access to 17 years of classified financial records. That woman, whoever she is, she's not nobody. The television in their bedroom was still on, muted from the night before. Clayton fumbled for the remote and raised the volume. A news anchor's face filled the screen, serious and composed. Unprecedented leak of documents has implicated Senator Clayton Ashford in what appears to be a systematic pattern of corruption spanning nearly 2 decades. Sources indicate that the Department of Justice has already begun a formal investigation, with subpoenas expected within the next 48 hours. Meanwhile, this footage from last night's fundraiser has gone viral, showing Senator Ashford's wife. The champagne video played again. And again. Maribel watched herself pour liquid over an old woman's head, watched the crowd's shocked faces, watched the victim sit motionless with dignity she suddenly envied. Turn it off, she said. Clayton didn't hear her. He was staring at the screen with the expression of a man watching his own execution. 17 years, he muttered. Everything I built. Everything we planned. Gone in one night. The phone rang. Then another phone. Then knocking at the front door, loud and official. Maribel reached for her husband's hand, but he had already left the room, descending toward whatever waited below. She sat alone in their bed, silk sheets tangled around her, the morning sun mocking her through floor-length windows. Last night she had been untouchable. This morning she was a symbol of everything wrong with American power. And somewhere out there, an elderly woman in a gray coat was watching the same news coverage with patient, fog-colored eyes. The reckoning had begun. Dawn crept over Washington like a slow confession. Pink light touched the Capitol dome first, then spread across government buildings and monuments, warming marble that held a century of secrets. Early joggers circled the mall. Coffee shops flickered to life. Newspapers landed on doorsteps with soft thuds. It looked like any other morning. It wasn't. At 5:47 a.m., the first email landed in the inbox of a political reporter at the Washington Post. She'd been awake for an hour already, chasing a rumor about cabinet appointments, when the encrypted message appeared with no sender address and a subject line that made her coffee go cold. Senator Clayton Ashford, complete documentation of federal crimes. She almost deleted it. These kinds of messages arrived daily, usually nonsense from conspiracy theorists or political opponents with grudges. But something made her click. The attachment was 342 pages. By 5:52 a.m., she had called her editor. By 6:15 a.m., a team of 4 reporters was verifying the first batch of bank records. By 6:30 a.m., similar packages had opened at CNN, The New York Times, CBS News, and 2 local Washington affiliates. Each contained the same documents, the same timeline, the same meticulous evidence of 17 years of corruption. And each contained one photograph. The photograph showed Maribel Ashford in her pale blue gown, arm extended, champagne frozen midair above an elderly woman's bowed head. The caption read, "This is what prompted the release. You decide what it means." In Georgetown, Senator Clayton Ashford slept through his alarm. His phone had been buzzing since 4 a.m., messages stacking up from campaign managers, lawyers, fellow senators, and reporters he'd never heard of. He'd silenced it at midnight and forgotten to check the settings. Maribel slept beside him, her face peaceful beneath a silk eye mask, her conscience unburdened by memory or anticipation. Neither of them heard the morning news broadcast that mentioned their name for the first time at 6:45 a.m. Neither saw the footage that began circulating on social media, 17 different angles of champagne pouring over an old woman's head while wealthy donors watched and did nothing. Neither noticed the black sedan still parked across the street, its occupant watching their windows with patient attention. At 7:12 a.m., the Senate Ethics Committee chairman received a phone call from the Department of Justice. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. By 7:20 a.m., a formal investigation had been authorized. By 7:45 a.m., the first television crews arrived outside the Ashford townhouse. Maribel woke to the sound of shouting. She removed her eye mask and blinked against morning light, disoriented by the noise. Protesters? An accident? She reached for her phone and found 11 missed calls from unknown numbers. Before she could investigate, Clayton burst through the bedroom door. She had never seen him look like this. His face was gray, his hands shaking, his eyes wild with a terror that seemed to have aged him overnight. "What is it?" Maribel sat up, alarm replacing confusion. "Clayton, what's wrong?" He couldn't speak. He simply turned his phone toward her and let the screen tell its story. Breaking: Senator Ashford under federal investigation for corruption. The headline sat above a photograph that made Maribel's blood freeze. It was her. Last night. Champagne suspended in the air, her face twisted with entitled rage, the elderly woman sitting beneath her with hands folded and head bowed. "No," Maribel whispered. Clayton's voice cracked. "It's everywhere. Every channel. Every website. They have documents, Maribel. Bank records. Emails. Things that were supposed to be buried forever. That's not possible. It's happening." He grabbed her shoulders, desperation making him rough. "What did you do last night? Who was that woman?" Maribel shook her head. "Nobody. She was nobody. Just some homeless person in the lobby." Nobody doesn't take down a senator overnight. Clayton released her, pacing the room like a trapped animal. Nobody doesn't have access to 17 years of classified financial records. That woman, whoever she is, she's not nobody. The television in their bedroom was still on, muted from the night before. Clayton fumbled for the remote and raised the volume. A news anchor's face filled the screen, serious and composed. Unprecedented leak of documents has implicated Senator Clayton Ashford in what appears to be a systematic pattern of corruption spanning nearly 2 decades. Sources indicate that the Department of Justice has already begun a formal investigation, with subpoenas expected within the next 48 hours. Meanwhile, this footage from last night's fundraiser has gone viral, showing Senator Ashford's wife. The champagne video played again. And again. Maribel watched herself pour liquid over an old woman's head, watched the crowd's shocked faces, watched the victim sit motionless with dignity she suddenly envied. "Turn it off," she said. Clayton didn't hear her. He was staring at the screen with the expression of a man watching his own execution. 17 years, he muttered. Everything I built. Everything we planned. Gone in one night. The phone rang. Then another phone. Then knocking at the front door, loud and official. Maribel reached for her husband's hand, but he had already left the room, descending toward whatever waited below. She sat alone in their bed, silk sheets tangled around her, the morning sun mocking her through floor-length windows. Last night she had been untouchable. This morning she was a symbol of everything wrong with American power. And somewhere out there, an elderly woman in a gray coat was watching the same news coverage with patient, fog-colored eyes. The reckoning had begun. Maribel saw her own face everywhere she looked. The grocery store tabloids. The gas station television screens. The phone notifications that wouldn't stop no matter how many times she silenced them. Her photograph had become a meme, a symbol, a warning about what happened when privilege met accountability. She couldn't leave the house without disguise. Couldn't answer her phone without screening. Couldn't sleep without pills that left her groggy and disoriented until noon. 4 days had passed since the champagne incident. 4 days since her husband's career collapsed like a building with rotten foundations. 4 days since the name Etta May Calderon had entered her consciousness and refused to leave. Maribel sat in her kitchen, marble countertops gleaming under recessed lighting, a cup of cold coffee untouched beside her. The television played coverage of Clayton's upcoming arraignment, legal experts debating whether he would receive bail or be held until trial. Her friends had stopped calling. The social circles that once revolved around her had closed their doors. Invitations vanished. Charity boards requested her resignation. The designer who made her gowns released a statement distancing himself from her reprehensible behavior. She was alone in a house that suddenly felt like a prison. The memory kept replaying. The lobby. The champagne. The old woman's closed eyes. Raphael always said this day would come. Maribel had searched that name 100 times now. Raphael Calderon. She'd found almost nothing. A few references in archived government documents. A funeral notice from 6 years ago. A photograph of him and his wife at some long-forgotten ceremony, both of them smiling in a way that suggested genuine happiness. The wife in that photograph was recognizable, despite the decades between then and now. Same patient eyes. Same neatly folded hands. Same dignity that Maribel had tried to destroy with a glass of champagne. What kind of woman sat motionless while being humiliated in public? What kind of woman whispered about her dead husband instead of fighting back? What kind of woman waited until morning to end a political career that had taken 22 years to build? The kind of woman who had been married to someone powerful enough to prepare for this exact moment. Maribel understood now. Too late, but she understood. She had picked a fight with someone who had nothing left to lose and everything necessary to win. The doorbell rang. Maribel flinched. Reporters had stopped approaching the door after Clayton's lawyer threatened legal action, but the sound still triggered panic. She looked at the security monitor. A courier stood on the porch, holding a small envelope. Not a reporter. Not a process server. Just a young man in a uniform, waiting patiently. Maribel hesitated, then walked to the door and opened it. "Mrs. Ashford?" She nodded. The courier handed her the envelope and walked away without another word. Maribel closed the door and examined the delivery. Cream-colored paper. No return address. Her name written in neat, careful handwriting. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a single photograph. The image showed her mid-gesture, champagne suspended in the air, her face twisted with entitled rage. The elderly woman sat below her, head bowed, hands folded, silver hair about to be soaked. On the back of the photograph, one sentence had been written in the same careful handwriting. Maribel read it 3 times before the meaning fully landed. "You poured on the wrong widow." The photograph fell from her hands. She stood in her empty kitchen, surrounded by wealth that could no longer protect her, watching the paper drift to the floor like a leaf falling from a dying tree. The words didn't threaten violence. They didn't promise revenge. They simply stated a fact. And facts, Maribel was learning, were more devastating than any threat could ever be. She sank into a chair and stared at the photograph on the floor. The elderly woman's face looked up at her from the image, eyes closed, expression peaceful, as if she had known even in that moment of humiliation that the scales would eventually balance. Maribel began to cry. Not because she felt sorry for what she had done. Not because she understood the pain she had caused. But because she finally realized that her life as she knew it was over. And the person responsible would never be punished for ending it. Because justice wasn't a crime. It was a correction. And Maribel Ashford had just learned that some corrections couldn't be appealed. The envelope sat on the kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. Clayton found Maribel staring at it when he came downstairs, his suit wrinkled from sleeping on the study couch. He hadn't shared a bed with his wife since the scandal broke. Blame had created distance between them, each one convinced the other was responsible for their ruin. "What is that?" Maribel didn't answer. She simply slid the photograph across the table. Clayton picked it up, studied the image, then turned it over and read the message on the back. His face went white. "You poured on the wrong widow," he repeated softly. "Widow." "Rafael Calderon," Maribel said. "Her husband. He died 6 years ago." "I know who he was." Clayton's voice had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like respect. "I knew him. Met him once, 20 years ago. He wanted to talk about my early fundraising operations. I told him to leave. You should have listened." Clayton set the photograph down carefully, as if it might explode. "He built the file. This whole thing, everything they have on me, he built it. Before he died. Like a time bomb waiting to go off. Why didn't it go off sooner? Because it needed a trigger." Clayton looked at his wife with new understanding. "You were the trigger. When you attacked his widow, you gave them permission to release everything." Maribel's throat tightened. "I didn't know who she was." "That's the point." Clayton laughed bitterly. "That's always the point. People like us, we never know who we're stepping on. We never think it matters." He walked to the window and looked out at the street. The reporters had thinned but not disappeared. Television vans still occupied the corner, waiting for the next development. "My lawyer called this morning," Clayton said quietly. "The Department of Justice is offering a plea deal. 5 years. Minimum security. I keep my pension. 5 years in prison? It's better than 20. The evidence is overwhelming. Fighting would only make it worse." Maribel stood and walked to her husband's side. For a moment, they were united again, two people watching their kingdom crumble. "What about me?" she asked. "No charges against you. Pouring champagne on someone isn't a federal crime." Clayton's voice carried no comfort. "But the court of public opinion has already convicted you. No amount of money will fix your reputation now." Maribel thought about the elderly woman again. The dignity. The patience. The quiet certainty that justice would arrive on its own schedule. "I want to find her," Maribel said suddenly. Clayton turned. "Why?" "I don't know." Maribel wiped her eyes. "Maybe to apologize. Maybe to understand. Maybe just to see her face without champagne in the air between us." "She won't want to see you." "Probably not." Maribel returned to the table and picked up the photograph. "But I need to try." Clayton watched his wife study the image of her own cruelty, captured forever in pixels and paper. He had no advice to offer. He had no comfort to give. All he could do was stand in his expensive house, wearing his expensive suit, waiting for federal marshals to take him away to a cell where money meant nothing and power was just a memory. The doorbell rang. Both of them froze. Clayton checked the security monitor. 2 men in dark suits stood on the porch, badges visible on their belts. "It's time," he said. Maribel grabbed his hand. Despite everything, despite the blame and the distance and the destruction they had brought upon themselves, she held on. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Clayton squeezed back. "So am I." He opened the door. The marshals were professional and efficient. They read his rights without drama, secured his wrists without force, and escorted him to the waiting vehicle without fanfare. Maribel stood in the doorway, watching her husband disappear into the back of a black sedan. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. The whole spectacle played out exactly as these spectacles always did. But Maribel wasn't watching the cameras. She was looking at a figure standing across the street, partially hidden by the shadow of an oak tree. An elderly woman in a gray coat. Hands folded. Eyes steady. Watching. Maribel blinked, and the figure was gone. But the image stayed with her. The widow had come to witness. Not to gloat. Not to celebrate. Just to see the scales finally balance. And in that moment, Maribel Ashford understood something she would carry for the rest of her life. Justice didn't need an audience. It just needed patience. The resignation letter arrived at the Senate 3 hours after Clayton's arrest. Official language. Professional tone. 2 paragraphs explaining that Senator Clayton Ashford was stepping down for personal reasons and thanking his constituents for their years of support. No admission of guilt. No acknowledgement of the corruption that had funded his career. No mention of the elderly widow whose humiliation had exposed everything. Washington understood the truth anyway. In the halls of Congress, conversations shifted to whispers when Ashford's name came up. Colleagues who had accepted his donations suddenly couldn't recall meeting him. Lobbyists who had paid for his influence claimed their records were incomplete. The machine protected itself by pretending he had never been part of it. By evening, Clayton Ashford was yesterday's news. A new scandal had emerged somewhere else, fresh meat for the endless cycle of outrage and amnesia. Maribel watched the coverage from her kitchen, alone in a house that felt bigger with each passing hour. The staff had quit. The security team had reduced to a single guard. The phone had stopped ringing entirely. She thought about calling someone. Friends, family, anyone who might offer comfort or perspective. But her contact list was full of people who had already made their calculations. She was toxic now. Untouchable in a different way than before. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent her life being untouchable because of wealth and power. Now she was untouchable because of shame. The doorbell rang. Maribel tensed, expecting reporters or process servers or more federal agents. Instead, she found a hotel manager standing on her porch, a man she vaguely recognized from industry events. He wore a nervous expression and held a small card in his hands. "Mrs. Ashford? What do you want?" "I'm from the Jefferson Plaza Hotel." He extended the card. "There's someone who would like to speak with you. She asked me to deliver this personally." Maribel took the card and read it. A room number, a time, and one sentence. "If you want to understand, come alone." Who sent this? The manager hesitated. "Mrs. Etta Calderon. She's staying with us now. Has been since the morning after the incident." Maribel's heart hammered. "She's at your hotel?" "She's an honored guest." The manager's tone carried weight. "Her late husband was instrumental in helping our ownership group navigate some difficulties many years ago. We owed a debt. When she reached out, we were glad to repay it." He turned and walked away, leaving Maribel alone with the card in her hand. She stood in her doorway for a long time. The smart choice was to ignore it, to hide inside her collapsing world and hope time would soften the damage. But something pulled at her. Curiosity. Guilt. The need to look into the eyes of the woman she had wronged and understand what had happened. Maribel went upstairs and changed into simple clothes. No jewelry. No designer labels. Nothing that announced wealth or status. She drove herself to the Jefferson Plaza, a first in years. The lobby looked different without the fundraiser crowd. Quieter. More elegant. The bench where Etta had sat was empty now, but Maribel could see the spot clearly. She took the elevator to the 4th floor and found the room number from the card. She knocked. The door opened. Etta Mae Calderon stood before her, wearing a clean blouse and simple slacks, her silver hair brushed neatly, her hands folded at her waist. The same folded hands. The same patient eyes. "Come in," Etta said. Maribel entered the room, which was modest but comfortable. A window overlooked the plaza below. Fresh flowers sat on a small table. The warmth felt genuine, not manufactured. "Sit," Etta offered. Maribel sat. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Finally, Maribel broke the silence. "I don't understand why you invited me here." Etta settled into a chair across from her, movements careful and deliberate. "Because you came. Most people in your position would have ignored the invitation. I needed to see you." "Why?" Maribel struggled for words. "To understand. To know why all of this happened." Etta considered the question carefully. "You poured champagne on my head in front of 40 people. You called me trash. You had me removed while your husband's donors laughed. I know. Do you know what that felt like?" Maribel's eyes dropped. "No. It felt like nothing." Etta's voice remained calm. "I've experienced worse. Cold winters without shelter. Hunger that lasted days. The kind of invisibility that makes you wonder if you still exist. One glass of champagne didn't break me. Then why?" Etta leaned forward slightly. "Because you did it without consequence. Because 40 people watched and did nothing. Because you walked away believing you were untouchable." She paused. "My husband spent his life protecting balance in this country. When powerful people believe they're untouchable, bad things happen. He built systems to remind them they're not." Maribel finally understood. The documents. The investigation. It was all him. "It was all waiting," Etta corrected. "For 17 years. I just gave permission for it to be used." "Why did you wait so long?" Etta smiled softly. "Because I had to be sure. Sure that your husband wouldn't change. Sure that your family's cruelty wasn't an accident. That night in the lobby, you proved it." Maribel felt tears building again. "I'm sorry. I know you are." Etta's voice carried no anger. "But sorry doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't restore my dignity. It doesn't bring back the years I spent on the street while your husband built his empire on lies." "What do you want from me?" Etta stood and walked to the window. "Nothing. I didn't bring you here to punish you or lecture you. I brought you here so you would remember." "Remember what?" Etta turned. "That everyone you meet has a history you can't see. Everyone you dismiss might have resources you can't imagine. And every cruelty you commit might be the one that tips the scales." Maribel wiped her eyes. "Is this justice? Is this what it feels like?" Etta considered the question. "Justice isn't a feeling. It's a balance. Your husband broke laws for 17 years. Now he faces consequences. That's not revenge. That's correction. And me? You face a different kind of consequence. You'll rebuild your life, or you won't. Either way, you'll remember this moment." Etta walked to the door and opened it. "I think we're done now, Mrs. Ashford." Maribel rose slowly, legs unsteady. She walked to the door and paused. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I'll never forget you." Etta nodded. "That's the point." The door closed behind Maribel Ashford, and Etta returned to her chair by the window, watching the plaza below, where life continued exactly as it had before. She didn't smile. She simply rested. Justice was exhausting work. The morning sun warmed Jefferson Plaza like a benediction. Etta May Calderon walked through the hotel's front doors at exactly 9 o'clock, the same doors she had been escorted away from 2 weeks earlier. This time, no one stopped her. This time, the doorman nodded respectfully and held the glass open wide. "Good morning, Mrs. Calderon." "Good morning, Jerome." She crossed the marble lobby with measured steps, her gray coat cleaned and pressed, her silver hair catching the light. A few guests glanced up from their newspapers and coffee cups. None of them recognized her. None of them knew they were looking at the woman who had ended a senator's career without raising her voice. That was exactly how Etta preferred it. The bench where she used to sit had been replaced. A new one, slightly larger, now occupied the spot near the window. The hotel manager had asked if she wanted a plaque installed, something to commemorate what had happened here. She declined. Memory didn't need metal to survive. Etta sat down and folded her hands in her lap, just as she always had. The plaza outside sparkled with morning activity. Businessmen hurried past. Tourists consulted maps. A young mother pushed a stroller toward the fountain. Normal life. Ordinary moments. This was what Etta had missed most during her years on the street. Not the comfort or the warmth, but the ordinariness of being part of the world instead of watching it from the outside. A waiter approached with a cup of tea, prepared exactly the way Raphael used to make it. The hotel staff had learned her preferences within days of her arrival. Some of them remembered Raphael from decades past. Others simply respected the name. "Thank you, Marcus," she said. The waiter smiled. "Anything else, Mrs. Calderon?" "This is perfect." She sipped the tea and watched the world move outside. Clayton Ashford had pleaded guilty 2 days ago. 5 years in federal prison, 3 with good behavior. His assets were frozen pending civil suits from the government and several private parties. His name had been removed from buildings, foundations, and scholarship funds. Maribel had filed for divorce. The house in Georgetown was on the market. Everything the Ashfords had built was being dismantled, piece by piece, like a tower made of cards finally meeting the wind. Etta felt no joy in this. She felt balance. Raphael had explained it to her once, during one of their stargazing nights. "Justice isn't about punishment," he'd said. "It's about restoration. When someone takes more than their share, the world becomes crooked. Justice straightens it." The world felt straighter now. Not perfect. Never perfect. But straighter. Etta finished her tea and stood. The hotel had offered her a permanent room, free of charge. She had accepted for now, but she knew she wouldn't stay forever. There were shelters that needed volunteers. Churches that needed organizers. Elderly people on the street who needed someone to remind them they still mattered. She had work to do. But first she had one more stop. Etta walked outside and crossed the plaza to a small garden tucked behind the fountain. A bench sat beneath an oak tree, overlooking a view of the Capitol dome in the distance. She sat down and withdrew Raphael's letter from her pocket. She had read it 100 times since receiving it. 2 sentences. "You are stronger than you know. And now the world will know it too." Etta pressed the paper to her heart. 6 years of loss. 3 years of homelessness. 1 night of humiliation. And now, somehow, restoration. Not because she had sought revenge. Not because she had demanded justice. But because she had finally asked for help. Raphael had built the mechanisms. She had activated them. And the balance had been restored. Etta folded the letter and tucked it back into her pocket. She stood, brushed off her coat, and walked toward the street. A young woman passing by smiled at her. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" "It is," Etta agreed. The woman continued on her way, oblivious to who she had just spoken to. Etta preferred it that way. Power didn't need recognition. It just needed patience. She walked toward the bus stop, planning her day. Volunteer at the shelter until noon. Lunch with Marcus Webb to discuss the foundation they were creating in Raphael's name. Dinner alone in her room, watching the news without needing anything from it. An ordinary day. A restored life. And somewhere, in the quiet mechanisms her husband had built, the scales remained balanced. For now. Because the truth about justice, Etta had learned, was simple. It never really ended. It just waited for the next imbalance. And there would always be another imbalance. Another powerful person who believed they were untouchable. Another cruelty committed without consequence. Another widow underestimated. When that day came, the mechanisms would be ready. And so would Etta Mae Calderon. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. More stories of justice and dignity are coming. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us, have you ever witnessed a moment when the powerless became powerful? Your words might inspire someone who needs to hear them today. Until next time, remember, you never know who an elderly woman used to be, or who still remembers her.